with a lot of what's going on here in the United States, sort of politically, socially, geographically, demographically, in the United States in the 1840s up to the early 1850s or so. And this section is going to also include a war. The United States is going to fight a war with Mexico in 1847 and 1848. And so this is going to be kind of a lot of excitement, a lot of different things going on in different places. Our sort of main political actor, not the only one, there are a lot of other ones, but our main political actor is actually going to be James K. Polk. And he is a Democrat, and he's elected in 1844. And his platform that he sort of runs on, he doesn't necessarily call it this, but we as historians refer to it as Manifest Destiny. Okay, he's still, like a lot of political candidates in his campaign in 1844, he doesn't come out strongly for or against slavery. He's somewhat muddy on the issue, with one sort of major exception. But he did get behind the idea of territorial expansion. And the way that he did this to sort of outflank the issues of slavery surrounding the ideas of territorial expansion for the United States was, this should be a national goal. We ought to all expand. We can worry about slavery sort of later. And that is going to lead him to have to address the sort of the elephant in the room, and that is Texas. If you're for national expansion, and Texas has been asking to be added to the United States for several years now, but the slavery question has kind of made everybody a little nervous about this, you need to deal with Texas annexation directly. And he is going to do this. And he openly endorses the idea. Okay, we need to annex Texas as soon as possible. So his opponent, the Whig candidate, Henry Clay, thinks, oh, this is great. My opponent, he's taking a side on this. He's going to catch a lot of scorn. I'm going to try to play both sides of the issue. He's going to dance around this and think, well, a lot of the anti-slavery people are going to vote against Polk because he's taken a pro-Texas stance. But the way that Polk endorses this is, again, it's a national goal. Slavery is not really an issue. And so it is going to be a narrow election. Henry Clay is going to come up just a little bit short. But once he is inaugurated, Polk said, okay, I'm President of the United States. I won. This is the way things are going to go. And so he pushes for the platform that he ran on. And, of course, that is going to be the annexation of Texas. So there's James K. Polk. Not a bad-looking guy. As you can see, a little bit of a receding hairline, but nobody's perfect, right? So let's talk about this Manifest Destiny. Well, what is that? What does it mean? What are they going to do with this idea? And basically, a lot of historians think that James K. Polk is sort of the most successful of all the one-term presidents. You have a lot of presidents that they come into office and they only serve one term, and a lot of people say, well, the reason they only served one term is because they were pretty awful, and so they got kicked out of office by the voters. That's not going to be the case with Polk. He had, I'm not going to run for a second term. His health was against him, and so he didn't run for a second term. But to be fair, he does get a whole lot done in 4 years. He gets more done in 4 years than a lot of two-term presidents get done in 8 years. And so his 4-year term is going to follow the idea of Manifest Destiny, that we need to expand the United States. We need to go forward with this idea, and so that's what he is going to push for as President of the United States. So what is the idea? All right, and a lot of Americans have really held this view for a long time, and until it is people like Polk and some newspaper people and some people in society that really begin to sort of speak very clearly on the subject. And that was the idea that it was God's will. God's will, the United States should spread across the entire continent. We see this reflected in one of our patriotic songs, From Sea to Shining Sea. This idea that, well, we're going to expand forward. Well, why? Well, we like social expansion. We like expanding the farm base. We want to go into new territory, whatever the reason is. But underlying all of this is a sort of a supernatural belief that, well, God wants us to do this, that He set us on this mission back in the 1600s, and He's going to continue pushing us westward sort of in the 1800s. So the problem with all of this is the fact that if you look at a map of North America here in 1844, is somebody put Mexico away, right? You're gonna take the United States where it is. It goes westward. You add in the Louisiana Purchase in the early 1800s, and then most of the western sort of half of the continent is, in fact, all still part of the territory of the country of Mexico. And so this is our artist's rendition of what manifest destiny might look like. And of course I use it as the background for the slideshow. And you can see how the artist did this. He divided it into sort of a light part, and on the back of the light part where manifest destiny has already kind of taken place, where civilization has already taken place. You've got cities and ships and ports and towns, and you've got telegraph wire and trains and farms. And then kind of in the middle area, you've got some exploration. People are moving in with wagon trains. And then the further west you move, you still have darkness and kind of chaos. You have the Indians, wild buffaloes. And they're being sort of pushed out of the way by this ever westward creeping manifest destiny of settlement here into the western part of North America. I don't know if there were any giant sort of 50-foot tall ladies wandering around the American prairie, but I'm sort of sentimental, so why not? Went backwards. There we go. And just like you'll see with Lewis and Clark, most of the time when you've got artists depicting exploration or settlement or something like that, is they're always pointing. They're pointing at something. You know, like, look, there's the Great Valley where we'll live, or look, I can't wait to put a Pizza Hut down there. I don't know, whatever they're pointing at. So this is what you can see with this as well. So there's the map of what is going on here. All of this territory here in purple, this is all Mexico. So if you're the United States and you're kind of shaped like that, and you want to go westward, the Oregon country, what is now the states of Oregon and Washington, is somewhat disputed between the United States and Britain. Britain's trying to colonize the area, especially around what is now Washington State. And Mexico, of course, is much better organized. It actually has a country. And this is going to put them squarely at cross purposes with the United States if they want to expand westward. And of course, you've got Texas down here, which looks a lot different than Texas that's on our maps today, because there was a huge area of territory that was disputed between what is now Texas, part of the United States, and Mexico. So, the real question of all of this is, in fact, that disputed territory between the Texas border and Mexico. So Texas is going to join the United States, but what had been a controversy between the Republic of Texas and its southern border with Mexico is now handed over to be the national border between the United States of America and Mexico. So Texas's problem that they were having with Mexico over their southern border is now the United States' problem, because Texas is now a state in the Union. Texas's argument was that the border for Texas should be much further south, and thus Texas should be much, much larger, and that the border should be the Rio Grande River. This is where it is today. For those of you who, like me, have been to Mexico, and you crossed over the Rio Grande, you'll notice that that's where the border is. Now, of course, Mexico had argued that, in fact, Texas, in their estimation, back when Texas was still part of their country, the province of Texas, right, was, in fact, bordered by the Nueces River, which was much further north, which would make Texas a whole lot smaller, right? Now, Polk is not a dummy, okay? He's not necessarily the sort of nicest chap in the world, but he's not an idiot. And he understood that if the United States was going to expand westward, it was going to have to go to war with Mexico. Either that or just, ask nicely. Hey, Mexico, can we have your northern half of your territory? Oh, we can? Well, thank you. But that's not going to work out, right? So he's really looking for a way to go to war with Mexico, but he's got to have some kind of reason to do that. You don't just invade somebody else's country and take their land, all right? The whole goal behind all of this, of course, is to obtain the land for the ideas of manifest destiny, westward expansion, and the idea of sort of nationalist feelings that would help him and his party politically. Right? So what he does is, if the contention of the United States is that the Rio Grande is their border, then you can send troops all the way down to the Rio Grande, and you're not violating anybody's border. It's American territory, right? So we can send American troops tromping around if we want to. Of course, this is a disputed area. Mexico says it's theirs. The United States says it's theirs. Well, the Mexican soldiers do their duty, right? Which is, oh, here come some American soldiers. They're on what we regard as our territory, so they open fire, right? Well, Polk has his excuse now to say, well, this was our border, and they attacked us on our own land, and the Mexicans shouldn't be there, and so this is an act of war. We've got the United States flag being fired upon. Okay, so Polk asks Congress for a declaration of war in 1847. Congress would grant him that, and the Mexican War had thus begun. We're going to see right from the start, though this is a pretty divisive war. Northerners look at this and they say, wait a second, well, our tax dollars are being spent to go and attack some other country, and of course the big problem was if the United States succeeds, a lot of land is going to be added to the United States in the southern part of the continent. So that would probably mean slavery is going to expand. So as we're seeing here, slavery now is the issue that you can't do anything, hardly, without people, well, wait a minute, this is going to affect slavery by whatever, right? And so in this case of the Mexican War, well, people up north, I don't know that I want to support the Mexican War because it may help expand slavery. Polk knows that the longer that the war goes on, the more and more traction the anti-war faction, especially in the north, is going to get stronger. And he needs a quick victory in order to be able to to get sort of finished with the war before the members of Congress basically turn up and, okay, wait a minute, no, the war's got to stop. We're going to stop sending funds for the troops, stop sending funds for the deployment. You're going to have to pull the troops out. While the president is the commander-in-chief, Congress is the one that pays the bills, and if they don't have money, then they're not going to be able to fight the war. Fortunately, though, for James Polk, Mexico was a very weak power. While it is a large country, it had suffered from a rather weakening effect of being a Spanish colony rather than being an English colony. As we've seen, the English colonies, really around the world, not everywhere, but in a lot of cases, they've had a lot of success because they inculcate the ideas, sort of hard work, liberty, that kind of thing. It doesn't always work out for colonial powers, the colonized powers. But with Spain, it's very top-down. You do what we say. And, of course, you got a great deal of corruption that's going on in Mexico. They had already had a series of kind of revolutions and instabilities. And at this point, they basically are not ruled as a republic. You got Santa Anna, who's more or less a dictator with this one. So the United States is going to be able to take advantage of Mexico's inherent disorganization. So Polk is going to launch a series of invasions into Mexican territory in order to be able to achieve victory as quickly as possible. Now, the most important goal of all of these, if you want to go sort of sea to shining sea, is to secure California. You need to be able to get out to what was then the northern half of Mexico's most valuable territories, California. It's got seaports, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, those kind of places in it today. And, of course, it was still relatively important in terms of economic activity, even back in the 1840s. And so this is an important goal in order for the United States to get there. But of course, you've got to cross over hundreds of miles of enemy-held territory. Well, you do have some people that are out in California that are pretty sympathetic to the ideas of first California independence and then California annexation to the United States. So you're going to have some volunteers, but they're also going to be assisted by American troops. And these troops and volunteers are going to enter the area and they're going to help capture it and secure it. So California, like I said, is going to very briefly be the Bear Flag Republic, which I've heard was actually supposed to be a typo. It was supposed to be the pear flag because they grew pears, but the person making the flag made a mistake and put a bear on it. I don't know if that's true, but why not, right? They're then added to the United States. Now, of course, it's pretty convenient that these U.S. troops under Phil Kearny just show up right as the revolution is beginning. How did you guys get here so quickly? Yeah, these troops actually entered Mexican territory and started marching westward before the United States declared war with Mexico. So, not exactly following the rules, but that's this is how this is going to play out for the United States. Remember what Jesse Ventura said, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. So this is what you can see. This is the American expeditionary forces. They're heading out here towards the Battle of Palo Alto. You get the Mexican forces being eventually defeated by the Californios, and then also assisted by American troops here as well. You saw in the harbor of San Francisco, there was an American ship that was just, we're just here, don't worry about us. And of course, the hold is full of guns and ammunition, and so they passed those out very, very quickly. So it was a multi-pronged assault on California that didn't obey really all the rules of war, but was very, very successful. Okay, so loss of California is going to be really important, but you have to knock Mexico out of the war. You're going to have to do something to really smash Mexico, force them to sue for peace, and end the war as quickly as possible before the United States Congress starts really breathing down the back of your neck, right? So our first kind of quarterback to try to do this is going to be a general named Zachary Taylor. At this point, the United States has two major generals that sort of alternate in terms of command, Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. They're very different in terms of their personality, how they deal with troops, how they deal with military situations. Both are very effective, and neither one liked the other one very much. They absolutely hated each other. And so at one point, I think they proffered court-martial charges against the other one, and they got a big dust-up. So that's what happens sometimes when you get big egos in the same room. But fortunately for us, they're not going to be in the same room. So the first major attempt is going to be headed up under Zachary Taylor, and it's going to be a pretty direct shot. You know, we've got troops in southern Texas. Mexico's right there. You go right at it. You go south-southwest, and eventually you just hammer these guys. So Zachary Taylor is sent to go into northern Mexico rather cautiously. He is going to fight a few minor skirmishes, and he's going to be victorious in those actions. But the Mexicans, you know, trying to defend their territory, get together a pretty large army, and they're going to attack Taylor's forces at a place called Buena Vista in northern Mexico. And really, when the troops sort of begin to gather on the field, it looks pretty overwhelming. The Mexicans have a massive numerical advantage, and Zachary Taylor at this point really demonstrates his nickname, which is Old Rough and Ready. He doesn't get frazzled very easily. Yeah, the odds may be against him, but he is going to keep his cool no matter what. And so as these sort of Mexican forces are attacking him, his forces kind of fight these guys off, and his staff officers, these guys that are his assistants, they start to get really nervous. One of them, you know, comes up to Zachary Taylor in the middle of the battle, and he's like, "Our boys are whipped, you know, they're beaten." And he said, "Yeah, but they don't know it yet. Our guys haven't broken, they haven't run." And what we're going to see is actually one of the sort of major actions that takes place here in the Battle of Buena Vista is a regiment of riflemen from Mississippi under the command of Jefferson Davis are going to kind of hold a key sector of the line. And just at the moment where sort of the Mexicans kind of hammer the American lines and then they kind of have to pull back in retreat, they're a little bit disorganized. Right at that moment, U.S. dragoons, heavy horsemen, ride kind of into the flank of the Mexican army. Really, they weren't large enough to kind of destroy the Mexicans, except they hit them right at the moment where they were sort of disorganized. It causes the Mexican army to kind of panic, and eventually it would rout. And just, you know, in case you're interested, they attacked backwards. They attacked in an inverted V rather than the regular V, which is normally how you attack as dragoons. For those of you who have never spent a lot of time as a dragoon. So Taylor is going to win an unqualified victory. It's a big victory, smashes a large Mexican army at Buena Vista, and as we've seen, military success leads to political success in the United States. And so all throughout the United States, as the newspapers begin to pick up the story, Zachary Taylor is hailed as a hero. This is a great winner, and you had people coming up to him, while the fighting was still going, you know, there's still a little bit of shooting at the end of the battle. They're coming up, "Oh, here, shake your hand, General. You're going to be president of the United States, you know, one day." And he's, "Shut up, you know, I'm not really interested in that kind of thing." Which is ironic, of course, because he would later go on to be president of the United States. So the United States wins an unqualified victory, big victory at Buena Vista in northern Mexico, but you got two problems. You got two problems if your goal is to drive further south into Mexico proper and defeat them in the interior of the country, cause them to lose in such a fashion that their government is going to say, "Okay, that's it, we give up, you know, we give up." And so these two problems were, one, Mexican desert country is very inhospitable to trying to invade. For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in northern Mexico, it's a lot like southern Texas. And so it's flat, it's arid, it's dry, moving large numbers of troops through a territory where fresh water may not be readily available. So you have that as a problem. The second one was a political problem. Taylor's a Whig. President of the United States is a Democrat. So the thought that Taylor is going to turn his military success and then possibility of even more military success into being president of the United States. And of course, that is actually that's a legitimate concern because the Whig politicians in Washington were already saying, "Okay, this is the guy we're going to run. We're going to run Zachary Taylor." And he's being groomed to run, and he's going to run in 1848. And of course, he will win. And just like all Whig presidents, there are only two of them, but all Whig presidents, he's going to die in office. So this you can see is Zachary Taylor is rather calmly sort of directing the battle. You can see kind of how nervous a lot of the staff officers are around. Their horses are a little skittish, and Zachary Taylor's like, "It's cool, chill, I got it," right? And so this gives you a good idea of kind of who he is, his method of command. This is the United States line kind of holding off the massive surge of Mexican forces firing into them. And then here you can see the cavalry charge by the dragoons at just the right moment at Buena Vista. So, all right, we're going to not authorize Zachary Taylor to go into Mexico much deeper. We don't want to give him any more military success, and also we're not really sure that we can succeed at this kind of thing. So who are we going to get to do this? Well, the other American major general at this point is a guy named Winfield Scott. He had been a veteran of the War of 1812. He fought the Seminoles. I mean, this guy had been around for a long time, and actually is going to be around for an even longer time. He's going to be sort of an old, fat general by the time the United States gets engaged in the Civil War in the 1860s. And so President Polk is going to turn to Winfield Scott, basically say, okay, you've got to do this. What's your plan? You need to come in from a different angle. And so his plan is to move his army by water to the east coast of Mexico and attack the capital of Mexico City via the much shorter route, i.e. the Gulf route from Veracruz, basically following the same route that Cortez used to conquer Mexico back when it was still the Aztec Empire. He said this is a successful invasion route. It's worked before. It can work for us again. So Scott's troops are going to land at Veracruz. They are going to capture the forts and all that there without anybody dying. It's amazing. When you consider how organized Winfield Scott was, he's basically the one that invented the idea of a boot camp. You bring everybody together, you sort of train them all for specific tasks. The United States didn't have an amphibious landing craft for how to get troops ashore, so Winfield Scott just invented one, and they built them. And then, of course, he actually goes through the operation and is extremely successful. So they capture Veracruz, they use it as a base of operations, and then they begin to march inland. But then they have a major problem. They have a major problem in that the disease in central Mexico is beginning to kill them. Because unlike northern Mexico, which is sort of dry and hot and arid, central Mexico is much more humid. And so you've got jungles, you've got dense forests, and you also got a lot of mosquitoes carrying diseases like yellow fever. And so Winfield Scott says, if I go start sort of slowly and kind of push the Mexicans backwards, the disease is going to do the job that the Mexican army can't do. So we're going to have to move very quickly. What that means is basically he is going to have to sever his supply line. He's going to have to, his men are going to have to carry all the food and ammunition and supplies themselves on their own sort of wagons or on their own backs or on their own horses and move very quickly into the interior. Now, the Mexican soldiers, all they have to do is play defense. All they've got to do is keep these guys sort of away from Mexico City, but they're going to be not able to do this. Winfield Scott's guys are outnumbered, they're often completely surrounded by the enemy, and there's really no hope of either resupply or line of retreat if they get defeated. Despite this overwhelming sort of odds against the United States at this point, they're going to win a string of stunning victories against the entrenched Mexican forces. Generally speaking, what they're going to do is they're going to find ways to sort of around them, sort of attack them in the front, lightly with troops, but instead of going into for a sort of massive assault, you'll find guys like engineers like Robert E. Lee are going to find their way around some of these Mexican positions, so the United States will be able to attack them from multiple sides, and then driving the Mexican forces or outflanking them altogether. They eventually will appear south of the lake surrounding Mexico City, and they've got to capture the castle of Chapultepec on the southern shores because it's guarding the approaches to the city, to Mexico City from the south. And of course, you got to breach the wall, you got to go and attack the castle, and of course, they got the scaling ladders, you got the U.S. Army going up one side, you got the U.S. Marine Corps going up the other side. There's debate as to who exactly was the first one up on top of the castle. Of course, the Army says it was them, the Marines say it was them, doesn't really matter a whole lot to us. But you are going to see some issues arise with this as well. So Zachary Taylor's nickname was Old Rough and Ready. He often just sort of wore a straw hat and he sort of dressed down in whatever uniform was kind of comfortable. Winfield Scott's nickname was Old Fuss and Feathers. He always wore his dress uniform, button-up military, he was all looking like that. He was kind of stern with his troops, by the book kind of guy. And while he probably wasn't a whole lot of fun to hang around with, he was extremely effective as a general. I went backwards. There we go. So this is Scott's troops. They're landing outside Veracruz. There you can see the fort that's been attacked by naval gunfire and Army troops as well. There we go. This is Chapultepec Castle. You can see it's situated atop the hill. You can see the breaching wall outside that has been sort of hammered open by guys like Stonewall Jackson's artillery battery. And here you can see one artist's renditions of what it looked like with the Americans storming over the top of the wall with their scaling ladders. Supposedly, according to at least one record of the events, is that a young Army officer named George Pickett is carrying the flag, and he's the first one on top of the parapet at Chapultepec Castle. When you look at this, though, from the other sort of point of view, look at this from the point of view of the Mexicans. The Americans are a conquering army. They're coming in to sort of shoot you and beat the crap out of you. And combining this with the fact that Chapultepec had been used as a military academy, essentially a military high school And so you got a lot of these guys that are in there that are the students trying to defend their school. They're 15, 16, 17 years old. And to this day, Chapultepec still kind of rankles U.S.-Mexican relations because, hey, you guys came in and slaughtered a bunch of our kids. And of course, the other side of that is American soldiers. Hey, your kids had guns and they were shooting at us. So I'll let your own morality sort that out on your own. So Mexican War is going to come to an end because Winfield Scott's army is going to move into Mexico City. The government falls apart, runs away, and then eventually Winfield Scott, okay, you guys need to get back together and form some kind of cohesive national government so we have something to negotiate with. And it gets a little silly for a while. They actually asked Winfield Scott, you should be president of Mexico. You can be our leader. Winfield Scott, no, I don't think so. So once they finally get the treaty put together, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States is going to pay Mexico $15 million for this massive new territory that essentially they've captured. So they do turn around and say, okay, we're moving into this territory. We're not just going to take it from you. We're going to pay you for it. Equivalent basically to another Louisiana Purchase in terms of overall land size. But of course, arguments in Congress immediately arise over the issue of slavery. Are we going to have slavery in these new territories? I don't want my money going towards slavery. Those are the issues that surround this pretty heavily, right? As we're going to see when you look at this in the rearview mirror, this proves to be the schoolroom of the Civil War. We're going to see that a lot of the main sort of leaders of the war between the states are going to have a lot of experience as young men in the fighting that takes place in Mexico. Lee, of course, is a captain of engineers, plays a vital role in Winfield Scott's advance on Mexico City. You've got Ulysses S. Grant. You've got Thomas J. Jackson, who's an artillery commander who later earned the nickname Stonewall. William Sherman, who is later going to lead a march through Georgia. George Pickett, we talked about there. George Gordon Meade, who will be the Battle of Gettysburg commander for the Union. James Longstreet, who will be basically eventually rise to second in command of the Army of Northern Virginia under Robert E. Lee. And the list goes on with this. Like I mentioned, though, U.S.-Mexican relations are soured. And not to say that it's sort of still awful today. The United States still has issues with Mexico over all kinds of things, but it still kind of rankles with Mexico, right? The spread of slavery here now into the territories is ever increasingly going to be more and more problematic, and there are going to be fiery debates, especially in the United States Senate, where the two sides are essentially evenly matched. You've got an even number of sort of pro-slave senators, an even number of senators from northern states where slavery is illegal, and so you're going to see that both sides now have a vested interest in they can't let the other side win, right? Because northerners, they hate slavery at this point. They don't want to see it spread, and of course the southerners are very suspicious. Well, why do you not want to see it spread? If it doesn't spread, then maybe you're going to try to kill it where it is. They're getting kind of paranoid in the South at this point. Compounding this problem here is in 1848, although the news doesn't get out until the next year of 1849, is that gold is discovered near a place called Sutter's Mill, which is not too far from San Francisco. And so there's a major gold strike. And so a huge number of people in 1849 are going to move out to California, especially the San Francisco area, which is why you get the football team, the San Francisco 49ers. And that was the nickname that a lot of people gave to these Americans that are moving west to California in droves in 1849. They were the 49ers. So they're all heading out there to get rich on mining gold. Most of them, of course, won't. But what that means is you've got a huge influx of people, essentially in a little over a year span of time, and that radically alters the movement that they were going to have toward go from being a territory to a state. California basically skips the territorial phase, and they say, we got a lot of people, this is the government that we want to have, we're going to get together and form a state constitution, we're going to have a state government, and they petition Congress and ask for statehood. We're ready, we got enough people, we're well organized, not a problem. Wait, there is a problem, and that is California asks to be admitted to the Union as a free state, very, very quickly. And of course, a lot of people here in the South are getting very much on edge as you're getting here to the late 1840s. The Underground Railroad is proving ever increasingly more and more effective. And of course, there were laws protecting Southern slaveholders who were losing their slaves to the Underground Railroad, but ever increasingly, people are simply defiant of those laws. Northern law enforcement, I'm not going to help you catch slaves. A lot of Northern citizens, I'm not going to give you any information to help you catch runaway slaves. And so this is continuing to outrage the South, and so you're seeing, you know, the flames are starting to get a little bit hotter here. And Southerners basically view this and they say, if we lose our parity in the Senate, eventually what we're going to see is the House of Representatives, which is gone. They're going to vote to outlaw slavery, and then the Senate will vote to outlaw slavery as well, because they will then, thanks to California, have a 2-vote majority in the Senate. And they begin to threaten secession here in 1850. So it's pretty crazy. So here you can see some of these 49ers, mostly men that are going to be coming out, although you will see some women make the trip out as well. They try their hand at mining. Most of them do not become fantastically wealthy. A few of them do. But mostly they're going to go out there, they're going to try to look at prospecting. You're not going to do very well, and then they're going to have to move on and do some other things. But once they're out in California, that tips the balance politically and in terms of demography. So the Union looks like it's going to fall apart here in 1850. Congress really doesn't, while members of Congress, they kind of go back and forth at each other over the idea of slavery. Nobody really wants the Union to break up. They're not, you know, in favor of that. They're having trouble coming to compromises on the issue of slavery because what their constituents back home are telling them. But they don't want to go to Washington and like, yeah, screw the South, or screw the North. We just want the Union to break up. So Congress is going to try to save the Union in 1850 because they realize that if the Union does break up, there's a good chance that it'll lead to a civil war, which it would later. So what they do is they try to get together all these different sides and say, okay, look, let's pass some legislation that will provide benefits to both sides. Give benefits and concessions. We'll come to a compromise. It would be much better for us to compromise with each other and have to deal with a little bit of things that we don't like, rather than shooting at each other, right? And what they do is they put this huge omnibus bill together with all these proposals, concessions for both the North and the South, and the bill goes nowhere. Because the problem with it is the senators really can't find that they can vote for any of it, because it's got some things in, well, most of it's okay, but there's that one part that's just terrible, okay? If I vote for that, people back home, they're going to string me up. You know, they're going to hate me as a result of that. And the same thing happens with Southerners. Well, most of it's okay, but there's one part in there that in the South they're going to hate me for. So the problem with this is that there's something in it that basically too many people just can't stand. So the guy that really rides to the rescue is a young Illinois senator named Stephen Douglas, a short little guy, sometimes referred to as the little giant. He was a great public speaker, but he's the one that's going to come in and save the process. And what he does is he basically takes the bill apart and puts it into manageable chunks. And he gets this sort of backroom deals done where it's like, look, you guys vote for the parts that you can stomach, and then the part that you just can't live with in your state, then you can go ahead and vote against it. And so that way, when you go back home and people are yelling at you, oh, well, you voted for no, that part I didn't vote for. The rest of it I thought was good, I thought it was good law, and so I voted for it. And so what that does is each then piece can pass, and so the whole thing can pass, but as chunks, because Douglas manages to get a majority for each piece. So the compromise does pass, and they hail it as, this is the final solution to the slavery question. We're not going to have to fight each other over this anymore. Really not true, but neither party is in fact really satisfied. So when you look at the compromise of 1850, and you lay it out on a chart, the North gets some benefits and the South gets some benefits. But when you really look at it, the North is the bigger winner of the two, right? And the first and foremost thing that the North gets is California is admitted as a free state. So you've got two senators now from California. They're from free territory. They're not pro-slavery. And so from this point forward, from 1854, now the entire Congress is lost. If the Congress, all of it, wanted to pass anti-slavery legislation, they could do it. They could do it because they've got the votes in the House, and now, thanks to California, they have the votes in the Senate. So you got that. You also have another little sort of benefit to the North, and that's the abolition of the slave trade in the District of Columbia around Washington, D.C. It doesn't outlaw slavery, per se, but you can no longer have slave trading in the District of Columbia. So it's sort of a minor little addition. So you can buy a slave in Virginia or Maryland, completely surrounding Washington, D.C., and then bring them in, but you can't buy them and sell them in Washington, D.C. Right? So the South gets some benefits as well. The territory that's acquired from Mexico, it's not guaranteed to be added to the Union as slave territory, but the possibilities open up to the idea of what's called popular sovereignty, meaning that as people move into the southwestern part of the United States now, and they're ready to admit their territories as states, they can vote on whether they want to be slavery is legal or slavery is illegal kind of state. So it holds out this kind of possibility for the South to say, well, you guys may be able to pick up some more states a little bit later. But of course, this one is kind of illusory, right? This is a maybe, and California being admitted as a free state, that's a for sure. So we're going to see that this maybe is ever increasingly going to turn into actually no, right? You're also going to see the strongest fugitive slave law to date. That's really going to upset a lot of Northerners. They don't like the idea of bounty hunters being able to sort of kick in their doors and search their houses and barns for escaped slaves. But this is what is going to pass the Congress. And so here you can see the breakdown of the territory. So you get the orange, the dark orange. These are the slave states. Right? These are the slave states that are in the United States at this point. And then the dark green, these are the free states. Now, if you extend that idea westward, of course, California is the odd man sort of out as a free state way out here. But if you extend that outward, what you got there is the light green territory. This is all places where absolutely there's going to be no slavery. Okay, no slavery. It's going to be here, and so you don't have to worry about it. This light orange territory out in here, that's where slavery is possible. Not for sure, but possible. Like we've seen here, though, when the Compromise of 1850 finally does come down from the Congress, it really makes it hard for Southerners to accept the loss of power in the Senate. And the Northerners kind of choke on trying to swallow this very harsh fugitive slave law because seeing fugitive slaves that are caught by bounty hunters sort of dragged through the streets of northern towns in chains or in cages is pretty rough. And of course, having your door kicked in by these guys who have almost plenipotentiary powers to do whatever they want. And so what we're going to see is neither of the major political parties are going to be able to survive on both sides of the slavery fence, right? And the Whigs were a national party just like the Democrats. There were Whigs in the South, there were Whigs in the North, and it, for the most part, had to do with whether or not you felt the government should spend money on internal improvements, how you felt about the Bank of the United States, stuff like that. But ever increasingly what we're seeing here is, and you really notice this split starting here with the congressional elections in 1852 and the presidential elections here, is the Whigs being split into these two groups, right? You've got the Northern Whigs, often referred to as the conscience Whigs, because their conscience bothers them about slavery, so they are going to oppose it. And then you've got the Southern Whigs, who are the Cotton Whigs, who get that name for a whole host of obvious reasons. And of course, the Cotton Whigs, they are going to be very much in favor of it. And so 1852 is the last year the Whigs are going to run a presidential candidate because they fall apart and they go away in the intervening years because they cannot agree on what to do. So that's the end of this section.